Before we jump in, a quick note of who's behind this podcast. Imagine this. You're about to close this massive deal. You've been grinding for it. You're pumped. And then your customer's legal team decides to make things interesting. What happens if you get hacked? How do you protect your data? And then your brain just goes blank. That's the nightmare founders deal with all the time. That's actually what YSecurity solves, the sponsor of today's show. There are 40 plus security engineers who've actually done security at Apple, Uber, Microsoft, Robinhood, Brex, and so many more. And get this, you don't hire them, you rent them by the hour. No massive salaries, no expensive consultants, just real experts embedded in your company helping you get SOC 2, ISO, HIPAA, whatever it is that you need to close that big deal. Set a monthly cap, know exactly what you're spending, and close the deal. Head to ysecurity.io/startups and book your free strategy call. Your first 8 hours are free. 40 engineers, 1 full working day, totally free. Go take it. ysecurity.io/startups. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Security Podcast of Silicon Valley. I'm the host, John McLaughlin, and I'm joined today with 2 very special guests from Bedrock Data. Pranava Adduri, the co-founder and CTO, and Gerchow, the chief security officer. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for
Good to
having
be
us.
here.
No, it's great to have both of you. We were just chatting a little bit before the show, and George, it sounds like you're calling in from a hotel room here in the peninsula. And Pranava, you're in San Francisco?
Yeah,
For all of our listeners who are maybe not as familiar with Bedrock Data as we are, would you like to share a little bit about what we do there?
absolutely. George, why don't I start and then you can bring it home. But I was actually thinking about Bedrock when I was formerly an Amazonian. I was sitting at AWS. AWS sees some of the largest customer environments in terms of data volumes. And oftentimes when people would ask us, hey, if I'm going to roll out a zero ransomware strategy, we want to make sure that our most sensitive data is protected. How do we do that? Well, the answer is go back it up, right? Go make sure that there are resiliencies in place so that if it goes down, if the data gets ransomed, you can get back up and running. But then the natural follow-up question is, if I have 100 petabytes of data, what data do I back up? I can't back up everything. So there has to be a risk-based approach to doing this, except none of the technologies that were available at the time could handle those volumes of data in any reasonable cost or even had the ability to scale to those sizes. And so we started the company because we felt that there had to be a better way with modern environments to keep up with that data, to make sense of that data so that at any given point in time, an organization can understand what data is most important to me and what are the correct ways to ensure that the organization can, at the end of the day, you want to be productive with that data, but you also don't want to shoot yourself in the foot, right? So how do we enable that? That's what we started Bedrock with the idea of doing. George, I'll hand it off to you to kind of add more color to that.
No, I think it's a great description. Data security in general and just understanding data has been a problem for a long time, John. And that was like the attractive thing to the company for me, especially coming this early on was, you go through a security incident. What's the first thing that pops into mind is like, did any sensitive data ever get out? Is that data being misused, mishandled? And then business cases around data too. You want to use the power of data to be able to drive innovation forward. So it was a super attractive opportunity. Great people like Pranava, Ganesh, and Bruno. So I'm super happy to be here this early on.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I love the focus on data. Whenever I'm with an organization, we're talking about security, we're talking about threat models. It really is about the data. And like all of those layers of security are to protect the most sensitive assets, the most sensitive data. And that's really the core of threat modeling of like, what are we protecting? It's not the compute so much, right? It's because if the compute is compromised, then the data can be compromised. And there's been more than one occasion where I've stepped into some roles and you can look around the ecosystem and you're just overwhelmed with how much data is out there and how much responsibility is really on your shoulders as a security leader, as a security professional, like trying to protect all of this data. So that problem can definitely be overwhelming. So
No doubt about it.
I have all the gratitude in the world that there are amazing, dedicated, smart, focused people like slugging through the details and the grit underneath the hood. But maybe Pranava, like being one of the co-founders, there must have been something or maybe an experience or a story that you bumped into that really instigated this entrepreneurial journey. Did you feel this problem personally in a past life? Or
In terms of where we saw the problem and kind of the inspiration / the understanding for the need for something like this, it really was during my time at AWS, where we would constantly be speaking to some of the largest companies out there, right? Like, every one of the Fortune 500s is there and the largest does a large. And so it really did, I think the idea really did start taking root when it came to thinking about how do you enable these teams to become more productive with that data, right? When they have these super large volumes, it gets siloed. There's different teams working on different things. And in terms of being able to make sense of that data at scale and doing it in a way that's responsible, I think to answer your question, I think the idea that this was actually a big problem was taking root while I was there, right? And then, once the business problem was clear, then it became a question of okay, well, what can we do from a technological standpoint to enable this, right? And how do we keep up with that data as we see the next order of magnitude of growth or multiple orders of magnitude of growth? I think the time at AWS was really formative in terms of seeing the largest of large customers and the problems that they were dealing with. Yeah. And then I guess in terms of having the itch to do a startup, I was there ever since college. So I would say I'd mostly been at startups right after graduating. That was very formative in terms of the culture that I wanted to bring to a company. And yeah, I think after the time at AWS and understanding the business case, that's when the time felt right.
yeah, and you had been in other startups before. You're one of the founding engineers at Rubrik, another security company, right?
That's right. Rubrik really was the place that, I joined there much earlier stage than I joined my previous startup. And it was very formative in terms of culture, in terms of working with a talented pool of engineers and really learning what you could do if you sprinted with a group of smart people. And so Rubrik started as a data protection journey, but when ransomware really started becoming a boardroom priority, telling that story, making sure that people were resilient against it, that's what took Rubrik in the direction of security as well. I was actually part of the team that shipped the first version of ransomware discovery and response. That was kind of the foray from data protection and the data security for me. And that continued at AWS as well.
Wow, that's incredible. It's interesting the sorts of things that attackers will come up with in ransomware kind of falls into that bucket of just really nasty, trying to make a business out of the malware and churn a profit themselves, just like all of the legitimate businesses who are actually providing legitimate services. Yeah.
And they're talking.
The whole marketplace.
Yeah, they're starting to talk too more and more. Like ransomware as a service is growing now. And there's so many different threat actor groups that are getting together and doing that. You said something that was very key, John, too, about feeling the pain, and then Pranava and Ganesh and Bruno coming up with the solution. I think, like in my stint at Sumo Logic and the MongoDB, we just always kind of forgot about the data. Those are two very data-driven companies and data-driven customers. But we always sort of protect the endpoint or try to manage everything through identity. And why not just go after the data itself? Who's interacting with the data? How's the data being used? When was the last time that it was touched? All of these things, and trying to do it at scale, get a better understanding at scale. And I think the scale part was always where I struggled. It was I wasn't necessarily the owner of the data. It was always someone like a Pranava, a CTO type that owned it, but I was responsible for the stewardship or protection of that data. But the scale was just out of control. And so that's why, I think, a solution like ours is just so attractive to someone like me who's been through public security incidents and felt this pain, and then closing the incident, John, and going, oh my goodness, did I close it? And now all of a sudden someone's going to put it, on social media that they actually exported the data out of the environment. I just didn't know.
Right. Things that keep up security leaders at night, right? You talk about scale. And I don't see data getting any smaller. I see it, 10xing, 100xing, especially now that it's kind of the new gold. We have all of this AI change that's just unfolding right before our eyes, and it's being driven by data. Like those improvements in the LLMs, all of this amazing capabilities that are just bubbling up that we had no idea, just a couple of years ago, how incredibly fast things would start to change. And at its very core is data. And so as the value of data is going up, I imagine that the value associated with securing that data is also just skyrocketing. Do you guys see that or feel that at Bedrock Data?
Yes. And I'll say two things about this. I'll first speak to the way I think organizations need to start looking at data going forward and the interplay of how security factors into that. And it also speaks to, I think, the changing relationship between security and engineering as well. And I think we can start with the first, and then George can help me take it home with the second part. But fundamentally, to your point, you can't have AI without data. That's kind of like that's kind of the foundational mantra. But in order to be competitive with AI, to be competitive as a company and innovate at the rate of your peers, you need to first have an understanding of what data can you use to enable that. And so we see all variants of this. We see people trying to be competitive at the Copilot level, where they want to connect a Copilot to all their SaaS repositories and now operationalize that knowledge. We see people trying to build in-house agents that are taking some of the data in their infrastructure and all the historical data that they have to create better client experiences on the product side as well.
Yep.
And then for the hardcore teams, they're training their own models as well. And so across the entire spectrum, the name of the game is how do we use the data that we have to become competitive, to become more competitive? And so when we think about it from a security lens, I think now more than ever, being the office of no does not work. The pressure to consume these tools and capabilities to be competitive is so high from a business perspective. If you don't have a sanction path, they will come up with a shadow path to do it, right? They will spin up a personal tenant of GPT and connect it to whatever upstream SaaS they need to get their job done. So the name of the game here is not how do you block, it's how do you enable and how do you give people the right guardrails to run faster, right? And that's really the objective that we should be aiming for. How do I enable the business? Not how do I say no? And so from that perspective, I think the way we look at it is start by understanding what data you have. Start with the visibility of understanding how that data is being consumed by different AI systems. In fact, use the fact that we know the data to actually enable finding data to build new initiatives. If you're trying to build a new model and you didn't know you had customer data in this form factor in a certain environment, well, your models are not going to be as effective, right? So use the fact that platform can understand what data you have to make your models even better. And then as you're doing that innovation, also use the understanding of how that data should be used to say, hey, you're building fast, but this particular model might be in trouble because of the data it's exposing, right? So kind of this idea of how do you actually enable the business, actually build more, but also give the scaffolding and guardrails to allow them to catch themselves in the one or two off chances that something risky is about to happen. But George, I don't know if you want to add more to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, you said something that was very key about not being the office of no. Like coming up through this, all my years at VMware and technical companies like that, there was like this thing that was going on where CISOs sort of reported into a corporate infrastructure and they were just always had a lot of friction with engineering. And then when cloud started coming out, engineers really started doing most of the security. They were like, stay out of my stuff. And then CISOs were like, no, 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 slow down, cloud, like slow all these things down. And then IT's footprint was reduced and all that. But AI has brought a different mechanism to this whole ballgame now, which is because of the amount of data and because engineers are trying to move fast. I'm seeing a shift to where CISOs, progressive CISOs, are now starting to report to the CTO. And what that does is it gives the CTO now the responsibility of, hey, I got to move fast, but I also have to be secure. And then it's got to take a progressive CISO too, who's like AI ready, who's like, how can we get this done and provide the proper guardrails instead of saying no and blocking all this? And so we're seeing a dramatic shift in that way. And personally, like John, I welcome it. Like I want the business to move forward. I want the right guardrails to be in place, but we have to, as security people, get out of this traditional bucket that we've been in and start thinking like engineers.
Thinking like almost like product people of how do we use security to enable the business to just like supercharge it into the future of AI.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's so well said, and, like coming from MongoDB, that was kind of the structure there. And then now like working with someone like Pranava is like, I'm kind of his customer in a lot of ways,
I was about to say, you're the customer of Bedrock, right? So do you double as the product strategist, not just the CISO?
In a lot of ways, yes. In a lot of ways, my needs affect what we're building and what I'm seeing with customers and what I want to accomplish as well too. So my role has a major impact on them.
Yeah, definitely. What's the most exciting piece about, having the visibility of where all of your data is, what type of data it is, and how to protect it? What does that feel like when you get to that place, like as a CISO?
Feels so good in the way that now it's not just about the security of that data, but I feel like I can also enable innovation by the business, because who really owns the data? It is not the CISO that owns the data. It is the business that owns the data. And the business needs that data to be able to make predictive decisions and drive innovation for customers to be able to leverage products better. And so it gives you like this, I wouldn't say peace of mind because we're paranoid people, just by the nature of what we do.
Oh, got my
But it
tinfoil
gives
hat,
you,
have it right over
totally.
here. Put it on. Gotta
Yep,
put it on sometimes. Yeah.
exactly. But it gives you this level of confidence and risk reduction, which we've never had before. Like I said before, we've always tried endpoint, identity, perimeter, and all these things. When you said it at the beginning, John, it's about the data. So why not look at it from a data first perspective? And then it's not going to go away, right? The volumes of data are going to continue to come all the time. And I love having these conversations with laymen, like people who aren't in our industry. And I'm always like, how much email do you have? Like, how much email do you accumulate? How many pictures do you have on your phone? And just the amounts of data as an
It's
individual
embarrassing how
that
much
they
email I
accumulate.
have. Yeah.
Totally. And so I'm like, you never go back and delete anything. So I explained it to them that way. And I'm like, now stop and think about an enterprise. And now all of a sudden you have 100, 200, 500 thousands of people and how much data just stacks up there. When you have visibility to that data, know the lineage, the entitlements of that data, how it works, what's sensitive, what's not. It's just a very powerful, pretty feeling.
I think having that visibility, it's the foundation for being able to then build the right guardrails, right? I like to think about this adage of like good breaks help you go faster. A lot of the conversations that we have now, they take on a similar tune to we are rolling out AI. As we roll out this AI, we want to use it to be competitive, but we don't know what data is going in, right? And as a result, we can't control necessarily what's coming out. And so usually the conversation then evolves to, can you please help me understand what AI I have at play? Like what have I deployed? Give me visibility into that. And then can you help me understand what data I'm sending to it, right? So then I can begin to understand what's okay, right? As we're sprinting, which projects are okay and which projects are putting me at risk. And to come back to your question about the visibility, that's really what it's enabling, right? It's enabling the peace of mind that of all the initiatives that we have out there, as a CTO, of all the initiatives that we're building out, here are the ones that are doing well. Here are the ones that we need attention to in terms of reshaping, in terms of reworking some of the data.
Yeah, I think data provenance is, what
Mm.
the answer to the question, like where's all of the data coming from, and then like what type of data is going into a certain engine or system, or maybe like a training set. Like these are coming up, and even like the most basic GRC conversations. I've been on many potential new customer calls where I'm discussing, with another potential customer's security team, like, okay, so here's an AI product. You've done some training. Where did the data come from? Do we know what type of data is in there? And if you look at, to go back to the GRC a little bit, there's new standards out there like the ISO 42001. This is the new AI safety, safe, ethical, and secure AI. And part of that is understanding like how did the LLM get trained? What makes it better than previous versions of the LLM? And not just like how do we test this and make sure that this continues to get better, for some definition of better, like we get to define what that means, but where is the data coming from and what type of data is going into that training? Data provenance, right? And so, yeah, absolutely critical for adoption of all of this new technology for large enterprises, for large organizations, for folks that really have to care deeply about all this stuff.
Yeah, you're speaking our language, it's copies of data. When it comes to data provenance, like from cradle to grave, when data is created, but how does it move and what are the copies? And does it still have the same entitlements to it? It's just so much around that. And then you were talking about training LLMs too. And even the way that people are using generative AI, are they using it in an ethical way? Is someone doing like manages 50 people and all of a sudden starts putting all of the reviews or comments inside of chat GPT and then says, okay, spit something out that helps me give a yearly review on this person. You laugh, but is it happening out there? And do we know
I'm
that it's
sure it
happening?
is. Yeah, and that's
Yeah,
that's
for
a little bit
sure.
scary because that's going to end up in the training set. If you're just using the
Yeah,
vanilla ape. Yep.
that's right.
My goodness. Well, if Bedrock was used at OpenAI, I don't know if that's one of your customers or not, but if it is, like, then you could actually flag that coming into the training data set and be like, well, maybe for the purposes of, building a better future, building a more private LLM that's just as good. Maybe we don't want to have that in our training set, right?
Yeah,
Flying agent.
Pranava actually, that's kind of like where Argus fits in a lot of ways too. If you want to describe that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the notion that you're talking about, and this kind of comes to the data provenance, and these are elements that could be used for organizations going up for ISO audit as well. In terms of knowing what data is going in and where that data came from upstream, I liken this to SBOM in software, right? You have your binary that you're vending. There's the software dependencies of those binaries, and then there's the downstream dependencies of those binaries as well, and libraries as well. And so in that same way, models have a DBOM, a data bill of materials. What what made its way into the training phase? Where did that data come from? What sets of processing did that data go from original data to refined data to get it to a stage where it was training ready? Then in most organizations, they have controls or requirements that say that data has to be anonymized before it can get to the training phase. But if it doesn't, that's a potential source of the model getting tainted. One example, like I just mentioned, is when it comes to sensitive data corresponding to your customers. But there's also other requirements. For example, in certain domains where the company might be procuring data from data vendors, there might be terms around what granularity of data can be used when training a model, right? And so again, how do you know that all those controls are being adhered to? DBOM is one way we think about that, right? So how do you start with the inventory of your AI workloads, whether it's agents, copilots, et cetera? How do you look at the data supply chain that's going into it? And that snapshot is what we call the DBOM.
A DBOM, I love it. I love it.
And to what George is talking about, Argus was actually something that we launched right before reInvent. And the idea is when you look at a model, on the left side, compute the DBOM, what all went into it. And on the right side, look at the guardrails to figure out what do the guardrails enable, what do they block, and what do they allow. And that gives you a gap analysis. Based on what's going into the model or the agent or the copilot, you have this potential of what might be coming out. What do the guardrails block? And then what do they still let through? Right? And it's a way of coming back to what I was originally talking about, which is responsibly enabling innovation. How do you let people run fast while monitoring the gap analysis and seeing where you might be getting in trouble?
That's beautiful. I love solutions to ginormous, extremely difficult problems that you can just drop into place. So taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture, I have all the gratitude in the world that there are incredibly talented, smart, focused people thinking through all of these problems. And it gives me hope that the future will be just filled with magical new technology that is not just magical and new, but it will actually be safe and secure. And one of the things too, that to bring kind of that lofty statement back to earth a little bit, I don't think of innovation as just anything that's magical and can sort of do a magic trick up on stage. It's like innovation, I think, in order for it to really be innovation, it has to have the potential to change the world. If it doesn't have the potential to change the world, I'm hesitant to put it in the category of innovation. And that means like the new technologies that we're building as, folks really on that cutting edge here in Silicon Valley, we have to think about what it means for the technology, not just to work and to be magical, but to be adopted. And I think that adoption piece is where security and data provenance and the controls and thinking about social impacts, maybe even of what's going on, really comes into play here. So it's a massive enabler to help everyone move fast.
We love that. Enabling. We love it.
I mean, you need it. It needs to be done. And it's the same problem everywhere. We're all going to face it. This is a community thing. And so building an entire company to just nail it just seems spot on. Right place, right time. Congratulations.
Thank you.
May I ask, what's been the best day so far for both of you on your journey?
I'll go first because Pranava's will probably be more profound. Mine was yesterday.
Oh, yesterday. Okay.
Yesterday, yeah, no, yesterday we opened up a new HQ here in San Mateo. And the feeling I got, John, when I walked in, I was just overwhelmed with emotion and happiness, gratitude, which you've said a few times, to be part of this, to see like our leadership team there, all of us there working together in our, new space. And, like there was like furniture mismatched all over the place, a ping pong table in the back that didn't really have a net stood up. And we were all excited putting it all together. Pranava dorking out inside of server rooms, closets with the wiring and everything else. We, like all went to dinner afterwards, just a short walk. And I just was so overwhelmed with positive emotion that yesterday was my best day. Like we did great stuff at reInvent. We've released great products. And when I first met the team, it was fantastic. But yesterday was just my best day. Being in our new HQ was amazing.
That's really special. Yeah.
I gotta say, that is definitely up there. Walking the office for the first time yesterday and just kind of seeing like, this is our first proper home, right? So that's definitely up there. I think an equally high emotion moment for me, funny enough, was there was a scare we had a couple of years ago when SVB went under. And I remember the entire weekend thinking, what am I going to do? Like, I have to make payroll. I have a responsibility to all of our employees, right? And when we found out that we would be getting our funds back, that was kind of like a new lease on life. It was kind of like okay, let's go, right? And so it was just a very intense moment of thankfulness that we had an opportunity to continue telling our story, and also kind of like a strong moment of recommitment of like, I can't, we have to use this. We just got another lease on life. Let's go. So it was just a very powerful moment for me.
I imagine that would have been just absolutely terrifying as a founder to have, a major operational piece like your bank just go belly up and then end up in the news for all the wrong reasons.
In hindsight, it was such an interesting 4 days because I remember I got on the phone with my co-founder and we basically just said, what if we only get this much back? What if we only get this much back? And we had like 4 levels of what do we do if we only get this much money back? And we basically made an operational plan for each level. And it turns out that plan that we made, where we had a scenario where we assumed we would only get half the money back. Right. And it turns out that plan was the plan we should be executing all along anyway, because it was a much more focused plan. It forced us to really cut out a lot of projects that weren't in the critical path. Right. And so it turns out that was actually a great exercise anyway.
Well, good job turning something from a scare into a win. Like a focus, I think, is one of those things that it is really difficult to get, and you have to be intentional and deliberate about it every day. And it's easy to lose it. What about the most difficult day along your journey? So
I'll go first again too, because since Pranava is a founder, he's been around since the beginning. I would probably say that the most difficult day was early on trying to talk to traditional CISOs about what we do. And the reason why is because I find that sometimes in the CISO world, you show them a problem and they're like, I don't want to see that problem. No one's asking me about that problem. So we put all this time and effort into illuminating like, hey, like this is a real issue with the way the data is moving. And especially like in AWS environments, when we find like sensitive data in lower environments, my expectation was that they would be like, I'm solving this problem. I'm so glad I know now. I'm going to go get it. And in the very beginning, my eyes were opened a little bit to like, some people just want to like, oh, I saw that, but no one's asking me for it. So therefore I'm not going to take any action. And John, that like is disturbing in some ways, because when I came up in this industry as a security person, there was a strong ethical thing that we had, like a very strong ethical component to being a CISO. And I'm starting to sometimes wonder now, like, because of all the pressure a CISO is under, to minimize risk. We know some of the court cases and DOJ stuff that's happened with, Joe Sullivan and some other people too, that is it getting to a point now to where the CISO is trying to reduce their own risk as much as the company's risk, if not more. Yeah. And so like right in the beginning, I'd say like that first or second week when I started seeing that a little bit, I was like, oh, wow, okay, we may have like a bigger problem.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. The CISO is being run over by other leadership in the organization, by the board of directors, by wanting to take risks. That can be hard, but we have a core set of values, and you have to ask yourself, like, why did you get into security? Like, why are you taking on this leadership role?
I think the cheeky answer to your question is one of the biggest modes of gratitude I had was when we got our money back. So the cheeky answer to your question is 4 days ago, 4 days prior to that.
It went from the worst day to the best day, like 4 day span right there.
But jokes aside, honestly, days where you have to let people go are always the hardest days, because at a startup, there's a very specific type of person that is well suited for early stage, right? And if it's not working out, it's always better to have that conversation earlier rather than later, but it never gets easier, right? Necessary, but not easy.
And even though sometimes those conversations can be like very painful in that moment and in the short term, maybe in the long term, it actually works out much better for both sides,
Invariably, I think the answer to that is always yes. Oftentimes, it absolutely can hurt in the moment of, but for the folks that we've gone separate ways with, we actually have good relationships with them still. And I remember I was catching up with one of them not too long ago, and he actually said that for him, he actually retooled afterwards, and he's actually way happier now. So you're right. It actually does end up being better in the longer run for all parties involved.
There you go. Yep. 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 Even though they can be difficult in the moment.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I know. I absolutely would not be where I am if it weren't for a lot of amazing folks that I've had the great honor and pleasure to work with and work under and work alongside of. And at some point, I started my career as an engineer and quickly shifted more into leadership roles. But it's always it's always been about a focus on people. And I'm curious if maybe if there's anyone in your guys' lives that kind of stands out as like, oh no, had a mentor or maybe they taught you something and you don't have to share who they are, but if you had a sort of a guide as you've grown and you've become the amazing leaders that you guys are today.
I've had people who I've just so close to and remain close to over a pretty long career. But it's those that make sometimes like a huge impact. It was a guy when I first got to VMware that was so hardcore in his feedback and the way that he just like would tell me I was doing something stupid. And I needed it. I needed it at that time. And I pushed back too. Like in the beginning, I was a little bit shocked, but then I would push back in certain areas where I felt, but I needed that at that time so desperately. So when you just asked me that, I don't know why it took me kind of back to him, but I know that in my career I needed it. And then a lot of it goes to what Pranava was saying about letting people go and doing hard things. I think that guy, more than anyone, taught me how to do hard things that would have like potentially good outcomes for everyone.
Yeah.
I think for me, I wouldn't say that there's any one person particularly, but I think it's a mix of influences. I would say one for sure is my dad, but also there's a lot of authors that taught me how to think about certain problems. Right, one called Winner's Dream by Bill McDermott. I think it really taught me what it means to be relationship first and be very genuine in how you approach a sale. It really taught me how to look at it from a perspective of how to do right by the customer. I don't think anyone quite put it in that perspective for me in the past. So I think a mixture of different influences have helped me a lot.
That's amazing. That's really great to sort of have that drive and that focus and the EQ and the awareness, the self-awareness. When we look into the future, and I'll let you decide like how far we'd like to travel into the future, could you help us see what is that vision? What does that success look like for yourselves or even for Bedrock?
I guess I'll go first again too, because Pranava's will be much deeper than mine, most likely. But for myself, and I'll marry the two together, it's going to be just trying to set an example for a lot of my peers as to how to be more open-minded, how to enable a lot of the technology that we're seeing today, how to like have the gumption to stand up to the board when the board is saying, how are we using AI, which is the wrong question, and just like leveraging the right technology to solve hard problems. And then I marry that with Bedrock data and just being around a lot of great people that are highly determined, like Pranava, to do the right thing and bring value to our customers in a responsible way. Like those things are just so meaningful in today's day and age that that's kind of like where I see the future going. And I have like full confidence that that's what's going to continue to happen.
I think for me, from a vision perspective, there needs to be a layer that understands what data an enterprise has so that they can use that data to be productive, so that they can use that to govern, so that they can use that to ensure that their customers' data is adhering to privacy law, so that they can ensure that all the contracts that they sign are being followed correctly. All of that needs to be powered by something. And right now, it's human best judgment. So I think going forward, especially, they use the term data echo chamber. There's the data you have, goes into AI, people ask prompts, it puts out new data, and that will get feedback back in as well, right? as you enter into this like rapid acceleration, there has to be a layer that's understanding what's going on at the speed of machine, not at the speed of human, to keep up with it. And kind of where I see this going is I see Bedrock as being this invisible layer that understands your data, that injects that context into every aspect of a business, right? So if I need data to do a certain experiment, Bedrock can tell me, if given the context of what I need to use it for, that's what's allowed, and gives you the right view of that data, not just whether it's allowed or not, right? So depending on every which use case that there is, something needs to know about the data. And so I think that's the opportunity here, right? And it's not just about building another single source of truth, as beautiful as I think our product is. It's about meeting the customer where they're doing their work. So if they already have an existing gateway, or sorry, if they already have like an existing just-in-time portal for getting access to something, Bedrock's context should be integrated there so they get access to the right data. And if they have an existing data annotation process, Bedrock should be injecting its context there to meet them where they are, right? If they have an existing security workflow, Bedrock's context should be injected there. So I see it as the invisible layer that permeates the business, understands what data is present, and helps turbocharge every single workflow that's there with that data context. I think that's how I see the future of enabling AI data in an AI world.
Amazing. No, I love it. That gives me a lot of hope for the future. If you could go back in time and meet your younger self, would you? And would you have any advice for yourself?
I would do it for sure. There's no doubt in my mind that I would do that. And the advice I would give myself would be more on the personal front than the professional front. And it would just be to have my eyes wider open, pull in the people that I love even more, and just savor every single second and moment that I have with them, more. On the personal front, without a doubt, that's where I would do it, and I would do it. And that would be like my core value, would be to just try to get more time with my loved ones.
It's really meaningful. Yeah.
Yeah. I actually think I would. First of all, yes, I would absolutely go back and meet myself, and beyond telling myself to buy more Apple and Google stock, I would. I actually think George said it really well, right? I think at the end of the day, whatever you take on, whether it's spending time with your family, whether it's building a project that you're super passionate about, being 150% there, and doing it fully. Because I think at the end of the day, that's actually what matters most. Right? And if you are there fully in whatever pursuit you're doing, it will have fruit. Necessarily about working harder, I would say, it's about being more fully present.
Present.
And at the end of the day, like that is what will give you that exemplary result. And so whether that exemplary result is in spending time with your loved ones and having meaningful time, or whether it's being heads down working on something, I think at the end of the day, productivity is an emotional output, right? And so if really telling myself that in whatever pursuit I did take on, bring it your 150, because at the end of the day, that's what you'll remember. I think that is what I would tell my younger self as well.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah,
Very inspirational.
Yeah, show up basically.
Yep. Be present.
Be present. Yeah. Be in the moment. Well, this has been an absolutely amazing conversation, Pranava and George. Thank you so much for sharing your insights, your time, your vision, yourselves with all of us.
Thank you for having us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, John.
Thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in to this episode of the Security Podcast of Silicon Valley. And please stay tuned for another episode. You can find links to things referenced in today's show in the description, along with the LinkedIn of all of the amazing guests today. So stay tuned for another episode. This has been a YSecurity production. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, folks.
One last thing before you go. Think about who you were 20 minutes ago. Maybe security's been that thing that's on your roadmap, that thing that you'll get to right after the next sprint, the thing that you'll get to after the raise or after something. But here's the truth. SOC 2 and ISO, these things are not just checkbox. They're keys. It unlocks enterprise deals. It opens up regulated industries. It's the difference between selling to a 10-person startup and closing Fortune 500s. That's where YSecurity comes in. We don't just advise, we build. SOC 2, ISO, done right the first time. 40 plus engineers from Apple, Uber, Microsoft, Robinhood, Brex. This is not guesswork for us. This is all we do. And maybe you're not the one who needs this, but you know a founder who does. the one trying to break into bigger markets, the one doing the 0 to 1 thing. Send them our way. We have an awesome referral program. We pay for introductions that turn into partnerships. So head to ysecurity.io/startups. The first 8 hours are free. 40 engineers, 1 full working day entirely on us. YSecurity has your back. See you in the next episode.